Hello. When dealing with the left, one thing that comes up now and then is the fact that there is a strong correlation between the level of education one receives and the likelihood that one holds left-wing or liberal views. Now, I know many people have already tackled the issue of why this is, yet I have found most of these explanations to be missing part of the story. I thus intend this video to be, through 6 points, a decisive and comprehensive analysis of why university students and academics are so much more left-wing. Reason 1. Social pressure. If everyone around you is a leftist, you have much to gain by also being a leftist. This first point is perhaps the least important, as it is both obvious once in a situation and useless in explaining how the situation came to be. However, it is nonetheless important to note. As things stand, the vast majority of academics are left-wing or liberal-leaning. Even many of those who describe themselves as conservative likely hold many aspects of classical liberalism at core, which is neither right-wing nor conservative, as many might think. I'll show a number of graphs and charts on screen, but the obvious takeaway from all of this is that academia and higher education more broadly are intensely left-leaning, with an almost insignificant proportion of right-leaning academics, except in a few fields like business and engineering. Thus, it is simply human nature to be under substantial social pressure to conform with and even promote left-wing ideas within academia. If you express left-wing views, you will be more popular with your peers and/or colleagues. If you promote left-wing views, you are more likely to be promoted yourself. And if you conform to the latest left-wing agenda, you are more likely to be seen as safe by whatever form the left-wing enforcement takes, be that HR, PR, or top leadership. Meanwhile, if you express right-wing views, or even any view tepidly more right-wing than the norm, you will be considered a social pariah, a potential risk to the university's reputation, and may possibly even be cancelled or fired for your views. It simply isn't worth the risk to most people. Beyond even this, though this is a form of financial pressure more so than social pressure, many academics have also claimed that their likelihood of having a grant application approved, usually by the government, or by the university itself, is also dependent upon how much they prostrate themselves to left-wing causes. If your application is seen to further the agenda of your paymasters, then said paymasters are more likely to give you what you want. This much should be obvious. Plus, I doubt many normal people would deny, especially in Britain and Europe, that the governing and financial elites themselves also have a massive left-wing bent. Reason 2. Network growth through tutelage. Students learn from their tutors. Left-wing tutors thus create many more left-wing graduates. Much like the first reason, this is another form of social pressure. However, this goes a lot further in explaining how we got to where we are. Much like how a microbial pathogen may split from one cell into 2, then 2 into 4, then 4 into 8, until there are billions of the things, one left-wing tutor can inculcate hundreds, if not thousands, of students who, if they also become academic tutors, can inculcate hundreds or thousands more. And after a few generations, almost everyone is left-wing. And by the way, those students who don't go on to be academic tutors in their own right go into other fields like government or education, or one of the number of many other institutions this country relies on. Now, in theory, this should also be true of academics of any political leaning, so one might expect some form of dynamic equilibrium. Instead, we see that left-wingers are massively dominant, so there is clearly more to it than just this positive feedback loop alone. The reason for that will be explained later, but this reason, that of network growth through tutelage, is nonetheless an important factor in understanding why the number of left-wing radicals seemingly became so high so suddenly. Reason 3. Isolation from reality. The world of academia often deals with isolated and abstract concepts. Academics also do not do manual labour. They are thus detached from reality and the obviousness of the conclusions one would draw from it. We are now starting to really get to the heart of why academics are massively overrepresented by leftism. Many people have talked about the concept of luxury beliefs. The theory of luxury beliefs posits that policies, of course, have consequences. But a luxury belief is a special case where those who push the policies are isolated from the consequences, usually as a matter of privileged position. For example, a working class chap can see for himself the changing character and demographics of his hometown, the struggle to find work, and the overburden of transport infrastructure. Meanwhile, a bougie middle-class Liberal Democrat in leafy Surrey likely does not experience such things and thus does not have to deal with the consequences. Academics, by and large, also do not have to experience the struggles of the real world, at least not directly. Most academics, I dare say, come up through the education system and go straight into professional academia. Thence, their life is one of relative prosperity, surrounded by like-minded people of all backgrounds also in prosperity, who share the same level of intelligence and the same worldviews. I find it hard to believe that many academics have themselves had to compete for a job at, let's say, Tesco. They are completely isolated from the bricklayer or the oil driller, and thus they cannot appreciate the struggle for existence and cannot learn the many life lessons one draws from the real world. Reason 4, few academics are geniuses, though most probably think they are. Firstly, so many people go to university now, meaning these institutions are no longer elite. Secondly, many academics are not rare geniuses, but instead reasonably intelligent people dedicated to their field. The very idea this video seeks to evaluate is the correlation between intelligence and a left-leaning worldview, as measured by the proxy of educational attainment. However, it is important to note a few things. 1. Academic standards have been dropping across the board, so qualification level means far less now than it used to. 2. Higher education attendance is at an all-time high, with 53.6% of young British women and 40.4% of young British men entering higher education, meaning these institutions now cater to midwits rather than intellectual elites. And 3. Being an academic does not require you to be a genius. Indeed, many of the academics I interacted with at university seemed like perfectly nice people, but not people of extraordinarily intellectual capacity. All said, academia isn't necessarily all it's cracked up to be. However, it would be dishonest of me to fail to mention that despite academia itself being overrated in terms of intelligence, all the data I have found does still suggest a correlation between IQ and liberal views. I don't know how many of you know the bell curve meme, with the idiot and the genius agreeing but the midwit disagreeing, but I do wonder whether these graphs are potentially just cropped off versions of that meme with the genius out of the picture. Even if not though, there are a number of reasons why someone with a high IQ would lean left, including what I mentioned here about luxury beliefs and being isolated from the real world, but also focusing on abstract ideas rather than ground reality, a proclivity towards going into areas that encourage political conformity, including academia of course, and a focus on material prosperity and technological progress at the expense of other traditional conservative talking points. Let's face it, a Sheldon Cooper archetype is not likely to place much value on family unity, cultural tradition, or nativist protectionism, especially if he considers himself above these corporeal and temporal concerns. Admittedly though, there are too many confounding variables to analyse this in any meaningful way, though I will expand on this in Reason 5. Speaking of Reason 5, academics are experts in their field only. Academics are, by the nature of their professions, experts in highly specialised fields. It would be absurd to think that they should thus have any special insight into unrelated fields. This problem, a problem of the arrogance of academic elites who buy into the idea of their own genius, is one economist Thomas Sowell has talked about at great length. As Sowell puts it, one does not expect the top chess players to have the answers to great philosophical debates, yet in academia it is often the case that experts in, say, linguistics believe themselves to also possess special knowledge in politics or matters of culture. Infamously, Noam Chomsky is the poster boy of this sort of anointed view of oneself. So too has Simon Roper, a chap who got big on YouTube for talking about Old English, waded into such matters as identity and transgenderism. Now, I'm obviously not saying these people shouldn't express opinions, but when their names begin with Professor or have PhD at the end, most people naturally assume their opinions to be of greater value, despite many of them being no more clued up on a particular issue than your average pleb off the street. It shouldn't be controversial to say that, unless you've dedicated significant time to research a topic, read around it, or at the very minimum listen to other experts talk about the matter, then you are not in any way an expert yourself. One can also gain expertise non-academically through practice rather than theory. Essentially, this is life experience, hence why the average bloke tends to have a better grasp on human incentives than the isolated sociology researcher. But the point is this: intelligence in and of itself does not overcome ignorance, yet many wrongly treat it like it does. So back to the issue raised at the end of reason 4. For a highly intelligent person to be right-wing, he or she would also need to be well-read or well-experienced in the inner workings of the human soul, the economy, the value of tradition, power politics among the elites, among a number of other things. Few geniuses take this path, thus they remain ignorant and isolated, and tend to focus instead on finance and STEM subjects. Which brings us finally to reason 6, academic subjects are naturally progressive and globalist. Many subjects, like science, are naturally progressive, seen through the constant push for new discoveries and better knowledge, and globalist by virtue of applying to the whole universe. Scientists also need not have any loyalty to tradition, besides a few standardized methods and superficial ceremonies. The idea of progressivism is that things only ever improve. Besides the potential loss of knowledge, which seems an unlikely thing these days, many fields of academia, especially the hard sciences, are undeniably only ever increasing in knowledge, thus only ever making progress. The vast majority of academic research done also applies globally or universally. The hard sciences are obviously universal. Literature and linguistics can have international scopes. Sociology and psychology often consider universal human nature. And even when something is specific to a culture, time or place, academia preaches moral neutrality about the matter. The scientific method, that of absolute unbiased effort to test ideas by trying to disprove them, would obviously reject the millennia of wisdom passed down by tradition. Academia is systemically disinclined to consider or adhere to tradition at all, often dismissing it as outdated superstition or archaic behaviour. I'm not saying that science should necessarily aim to be traditionalist. I think that would be absurd. But I am pointing out that it is not traditionalist. It is no wonder then that scientists dismiss ideas such as national interest and aristocratic hierarchy as the petty squabbling of tribalist ants. And it's no surprise that they view civilizations in abstract progressive terms such as the Kardashev scale, rather than any real sense of prosperity or human fulfillment. Academia is, by its nature, abstract, theoretical, and both progressive and globalist in outlook. It should come as no surprise that this extends into the political views of the academics who live in this environment. Lastly, I want to address whether academia deals in truth or facts, as is often claimed. The simplest answer is no. Fields like the hard sciences may seek to discover the truth about the universe, but the reality of academia is that it deals in theory, not in practice. In theory and practice are the same, of course, but in practice they are not. Thus, the academic is blind to the complex natural world and civilization he or she lives in. The world will not conform to your expectations and categorizations, and it is to a large extent unknowable. And it is also true that whilst academia may try to find facts through hypothesis and experiment, most fields are largely unable to prescribe wisdom. Knowing how to make a solar panel 5% more efficient does not make one wise. Knowing the factors that made King Henry VIII divorce Catherine of Aragon does not make one wise. Knowing the etymology of the word wise does not make one wise. And knowing that, at this rate, 100 South Koreans today would on average have fewer than 6 great-grandchildren between them also does not make one wise. So you can have your list of facts, you can have your specialised knowledge, and you can even have your set of ideas that work in theory, but this does not mean they will work in practice. It takes wisdom to recognise what ideas have worked in the past, and it takes wisdom to understand that traditional ideas have been of great utility to the people of the past, and that we should not blindly abandon them. So yes, whilst you may have your smarmy, Reddit-a-tier QI panel list of factoids, there is no reason to think that higher education is a good factor in qualifying you to give political opinions. Nor even is there any great reason to think that intelligence alone qualifies you to speak about matters you know no extraordinary amount about. Academic excellence, intelligence and diligence should be thought of as tools that help one understand faster and better, but they are ultimately just tools, not finished products. It would also be wise to remember that we are all human and that we are all prone to bias. Even the arrogant academic who views bias to be beneath him or her is biased. So the next time you see some smug mid-wit leftists saying that all the people with degrees and PhDs agree with them, remember these 6 points. And remember that educational attainment and IQ test scores do not make these people right. Anyway, thanks for watching. God save the king.